Today I want to talk about the size of stone points that we hunt with nowadays compared to old points and a lot of the points that people are making nowadays that aren't necessarily good for hunting. This is a huge topic. I could sit here and talk an hour. In fact, I've sat and I've talked longer than an hour already, and I keep going back and starting a video over, realizing I need to talk about smaller subjects because I can talk on this for a long time. So today, all we're going to talk about is historical accuracy with small points for arrows as opposed to large points. And then we'll move on to another video where I talk about the points that we have now and the importance of size and everything. But again, this is a huge topic, so hang with me on it, and I'll explain the historical aspects behind it. And then in a different video, we'll go ahead and talk about something altogether different, but still based on stone points. So what we have here is an Overstreet identification guide. I don't care what the points are valued at or anything like that. What I love about this book is that it gives you carbon dating age ranges for each of these points. It also shows the points to scale. This is how large these points actually are. If you would take these are real artifacts that people have picked up and sent pictures and submitted to this book for educational purposes. So if you took the actual point and laid down on this, it would be the size of it, and that's going to be really important for us when I get to explaining why. On this page we show some agate basin points, and you can see the size of these points right here, how large they are. And these date back to about 8,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago, and they're much larger. They're way too big for bow and arrow. These are very early atlatl or later lance points. And the date on this is going to be important, so we'll go ahead and remember this 8,000 years ago. On the same page, and these are just in alphabetical order, so it doesn't mean time, we can see these alba points here at the bottom that are much smaller, and these are dated to 2,000 to 400 years before present. So they're much later in history, closer to our own time, and notice the size difference is so much smaller. Likewise, if we have these hardened points that are fairly large, they're dated from 9,000 to 6,000 years before present. And then we also have on this page the Hillsborough points that are these tiny little triangle points, and these are all dated from 300 to 200 years before present. So we can follow a trend in this book that as time goes by, the points get smaller, and there's no distinct time that this happens. It's over a period of thousands of years. In fact, there's some of these that we can look at, like LaCroix points, that are smaller but are still 9,000 years old. But what this does show us is a transition from atlatl peoples to bow and arrow peoples. There's no clear date as to when people started shooting bows and arrows in North America. I mean, you got to figure when they came out with this technology, we didn't have telephones or internets or anything, so it's not like we just called up everybody and said, hey, we got this new great thing called the bow and arrow, y'all ought to try it out, and everybody just switched. Didn't work like that. What you see is it's traveling from very slowly village to village. It takes thousands of years for people to get this information and then to actually put it into use. You know, just like today, sometimes we look at new things and we're afraid to change. We want to stay to it. You think, well, if it's not broke, we don't want to fix it. So these people that are very successful with their atlatls might be hesitant to switch over to bow and arrow. So you could imagine how long it might take. Now, as far as widespread usage of the bow and arrow in North America, I'm going to put roughly, give or take 1,000 years, but at about 3,000 years ago. Now, we can't really say that for sure. We don't have historical records, but we can see this in the point record that, again, the later in history the smaller the points get, and earlier on the bigger the points get, and that's obviously because the bow and arrows require smaller points as opposed to the large spears. And why this is important in history is it shows us that the points that native peoples were hunting with the bow and arrow were small points. They were not large points at all. And a lot of people today are going out hunting with points that are much too large to be successful with, simply because they pick up an Overstreet journal and they say, I want to make a Moro Mountain point, and it's this big, and they say, I want to make that point, that's a replica point, and I'm going to make one that looks just like that, and I'm going to go shoot a deer with it. The problem is they're taking an atlatl point and they're putting it on the end of their arrow, and they're hoping to be successful with it, and it doesn't always work like that. Now, there are instances where shooting a big point can work, and I'm going to explain that in a different video, but on this one we're just going to stay on the dates and the historical aspects. But if you go through this entire book, you're going to find these early points, like these great big spear points, really early in time. And as the more crude spears and stuff fade out, we're going to get more refined, smaller, sharper points as we have this transition from spears, atlatls to bow and arrow. And if you go through the whole book, you'll notice that pretty much all the very small little points you see are early. They're only 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, and that's because they stopped using the atlatl and the bow and arrow was more widespread. And now I'm not saying that everybody stopped using the atlatl, because you will find some larger points and find some historic, proof that they didn't just give up the atlatl. But for the most part, it's easy to see by looking through this that the small points, the very small ones, even one size of your thumbnail, were used on bows and arrows, and some that a little bit larger, about maybe an inch wide, give or take, maybe an inch and a half long. But that's the really important part. Get you one of these books if you want to figure it out, but it's easy to see that the small points are for arrows and the large ones are for atlatls.